Welcome everybody to the inaugural NJTA web series. My name is Josh Copera, and myself and Jason Osterhout. We're glad you're here. We'll be your hosts for the morning or the afternoon. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping issues. At the end of this session, there'll be time for questions, but throughout the entire seminar, you can go on the chat button on the bottom of your control panel and ask any questions, and either Jason or myself will bring those questions up to Rich. Very important. In order to receive your credits, you will need to take a picture of yourself holding your driver's license and email it to the email address here that's on the screen, execdirector@njturfgrass.org. And in your subject line, please add 12/9/20 class. That would be a great help. Throughout the entire program, in order for you guys to get CEU credits, guys and gals, you get your CEU credits, we have to have 4 questions to prove your presence in the program. These are not pass fail, they're just validating your presence, and that's about it. Just to touch on a couple of future classes we'll be holding. On Tuesday, January 12th, Adam Moeller will be discussing the trials and tribulations of hosting a fall US Open. Tuesday, February 9th, Dr. Bruce Clark at 1 p.m. will be discussing developing a fungicide program that is effective and environmentally sound. And on Tuesday, March 9th, Dr. Matt Elmore will get loose from the goose, understanding and controlling goosegrass in New Jersey. If you are not a current member of the NJTA, we thank you for your. If you are a current member of the NJTA, we thank you for your support. If you are not a member, we hope that you consider joining us. We offered these free CEU classes and this training platform due to our tremendous sponsorships that we had on that first page. We couldn't have done this without them. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Rich Buckley. Dr. Rich Buckley runs the Plant Diagnostic Lab and Nematode Detection Service at the Ralph Geiger Turfgrass Education Center at Rutgers. With decades of experience working in one of the leading diagnostic labs in the country, he is highly regarded as a leader in the field of turfgrass problem solving. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce and share Dr. Rich Buckley's screen in order to present for us 2020 year in review. Thank you.
Okay, I think you see my mess here on my desktop, and let me start the program. Have to tell you, well, first of all, it's an honor to be here and be the first speaker in this series. We were just remarking about the fact that we're all working at home. Well, I'm working at home, and we would much rather be in Atlantic City doing this. The weird thing for me anyway is when you're in that room, we usually have the golf sessions in, and you're up there on that stage, and all the lights are on you. You can't see anybody out in the audience. I mean, except for the first couple of rows down front, you're all a blur out there. And so the weird thing is, I'm sitting in my kitchen, and I can't see nobody either at this point. So I guess it's all the same. I'm just going to talk, and this program, or my talk, is a reflection of what we saw in the laboratory this year. I'm going to talk about some random things for a while, and then focus on a couple of diseases to sort of wrap it up at the end. As Josh said, there are some questions interspersed throughout that you're going to have to answer to get your credits. I guess, with all these online programs. The DEP has to have some way of knowing that you're here and that you actually listened. In my turf school class this week, at the end of the lecture, we turn off the PowerPoint, and then you can see everybody. And there was a dude who was asleep, and it was it was pretty fun for us to make fun of him until he actually woke up. But at any rate, if you were asleep in the audience, I might zip you with a laser pointer. I can't do that here. So here we go. So get, Plant Diagnostic Lab, we've been in existence since July 6th, 1991. I'll never forget Ken Kraus walking in with 20 perfectly healthy plugs. And my partner at the time, Karen Cackley, we looked at each other and thought when he walked out the door, we don't charge enough. And so that started us down the road. And at this point, we're over 65,000 samples in 30 years that we've been doing this. And this graph, and I've showed this to you guys before, we update it every year. It represents every sample that we've had. So clearly our busy time of the year is same as yours, through the warm weather, May through September. We get some work in the fall, mostly survey work and that sort of thing. But again, it's a seasonal business that we're in, and 2020, I have to tell you, it was one of the hardest years for Sabrina and I in the last 10 or so. Our samples are divided up between mostly turf and ornamentals. This is a reflection clearly of New Jersey as an urban agriculture state. I'm like reminding you guys that we do stuff besides golf turf. We actually even get a few field crop samples now and then. But turf represents 40% of our historical total. It's interesting. I make Sabrina upgrade the data in this pie chart every year, but the percentages never change. And so for me, when I look at that, I suddenly realize that I have looked at more than 20,000 cup cutter samples for disease and insect pests, and it's kind of a remarkable thing from this side to think that have been involved in that much death and destruction. Our ornamental samples are again 52%. We saw a pretty significant drop, and if you look at our totals from 2019 to 2020, we're down roughly 600 plus samples. A lot of that is reflected here in the ornamentals. We're looking at close to 200 samples here, and the rest of the large majority of the rest of the samples that we were missing come from State Department of Ag survey work that we did. We usually get 800 to 1,000 samples from those guys, and we got 400 this year. So those guys were out of their office, and their programs were fouled up, as well as ours. And so as for turf, as far as turf grass is concerned, it's a moderate drop. 83 samples, I think, if I'm doing the math right on the spot here, and 592 turfgrass samples is within the the range of our normal submission numbers over the last few years. It's clearly not a bad year for us. We always like the more the merrier, but 2010 only comes around once in a while. So again, we had a good year, and again, I'm sorry to say that, but a good year for me means a bad year for you guys. And but we saw a lot of stuff. The submissions came again, during the summer. It looks real slow here in the beginning of the year. And March and April were really hard for us. At one point, we were down 70% from our normal submissions. But we started picking up, once everybody started golfing and things started to get back to, the normal for 2020, samples came in. One thing that we were remarking about when we were looking at this data was the drop in August. These numbers in June and August are normally near 150 samples, And so the reduction in turf samples came late in the season rather than early in the season. You know, we don't get a lot of turf until we get into mid-May. So again, you know, it's pretty typical. The numbers are a little bit lower, but nothing that suggests that you guys had a harder season or an easier season than normal, at least from our perspective. You know, it's all within the statistical normal submissions for the season. So that's my second bedroom, and so I want to talk about COVID a little bit. I think my last official talk to golf course superintendents was up there at Galloping Hills in late March, and we at that point were getting ready to go into all the shutdown stuff, and we were kicked out of our facilities. You know, the university closed down, and we didn't know what to do. So I brought all the stuff home and set up a lab in my second bedroom, and we had all the mail forwarded to Sabrina's house. And so Sabrina and I would like meet each other halfway between our houses and swap samples and swap packages. I'd come home and do it, and then I'd give her the stuff, and she would type the letters and mail the letters and do that sort of stuff. So that worked for a little while. It was kind of cool. You know, I had some samples dropped off on my porch. Stuff were coming in the mail. It's cool to me because now I look out my porch into the, you know, and I got a pretty crummy turf grass outside my house here. I live in a condo, and we have the low bid dudes, and they water so much, man. You walk out there and I sink up to my ankles. But now I got plugs from a whole bunch of high-end golf courses out there, and I can point to I can point to turf grass from multiple different locations. Because what's the point? You know, I had to fill in the thin spots somehow. So your plug might be growing outside my window, and so that brings me to this. You know, I'm talking about my house here, and before I start talking about grass and not the kind on the picture there, that's just a hint for the answer to the question. It's saying, you know, how am I going forward? What rock and roll band is well represented on the wall behind me? If you could see me, because I cannot for the life of me make my camera work, you would see that my house is a bachelor pad, and it's filled with bad decorations from concerts I went to over the years, and so yeah. Hopefully you can get that question right.
Rich, just to let you know, I've just launched that question, so we're just waiting for everybody to answer it. We're 58% submitted at this point.
All right, so the question was launched. All right, so here's what happened to us. You know, we're working from home, and it was okay. And I got a phone call from a cat that's a writer for Golf Course Industry magazine, and he interviewed me about COVID, and I sent him the picture, and we made it into the magazine, right? And so I showed the article to Dr. Clark, and Dr. Clark's always promoting us around the university, and he starts showing it to everybody, and it gets passed around. And next thing you know, I get a phone call from Rutgers Environmental Health and Safety, and they're like, you can't do that. You gotta bring that stuff home. So that started our journey back into the laboratory, where in the beginning we were only closed to the public, so you could come in the building, and then ultimately they closed the farm down for only essential workers. And so we put up a flatbed. Joe Clark and Sabrina got a flatbed outside the farm gate where samples could be dropped off. And I have to tell you, man, I never got more texts from Keith Kubik and Nick Alley. We left the sample out there. You know, it's like I hear my phone go bing, and I'm like, damn, I got to walk out to the trailer. And then I thought, well, just tell Sabrina to go out there and get it. And so there she is, picking up samples and working. So what, you know, once we figured out how to get samples in the lab, then we started having a normal type season. But clearly Sabrina does all the work. Now, you know, the chaos that we were having, I think, was also something that you guys were having, and I put a question mark here because chaos might be melodramatic. But you know, beginning of the year, you guys were closed, and it wasn't real clear when and how you were going to be open and what the rules were. And you know, I just saw nothing but people complaining about one person to a cart and all the carnage and the number of rounds, and you know, Tony Hooks posting pictures of him mowing fairways and stuff. And so you know, I recognize that you guys had some problems. And what was interesting to me was that in the spring, we started doing these webinars, and I would listen, and, you know, I was on a couple, and I'd listen to my colleagues, my research scientist friends, try to tell you guys what to do when there was no golf and you had no staff. And so, you know, we heard a lot. I heard a lot about, you know, don't fertilize, mow higher, growth regulated heavily, you know, these things that you might have done without any kind of play, or at least to preserve the turf grass until you can get play. And then, you know, suddenly golf courses opened, and you had to change from this slow the grass growth down because we don't have enough crew to cut, to we have to have a playable surface, you know, for our clientele. And that in its own right caused a lot of problems. And I remember talking to Frank Rossi, and here I'm throwing Frank out there because and this is something I did. You know, I thought, well, if I'm going to review the year, maybe I should just review my Twitter feed and see what I was talking about through the season. And we use Twitter for awareness and education a little bit, but also as a marketing tool, just to remind people that we're here. And I go on radio with Frank a couple of times a year, and remember talking to Frank about about this you know, you're mowing at 150 and then you're mowing at 110, and all the unanticipated consequences of this hurry up and slow the growth down, and then hurry up and make the grass grow kind of a dichotomy that a lot of you guys were facing. And so, you know, one of the first things that we saw from that, besides for the, you know, just the outright damage from traffic, is Anthracnose. You know, and I'm going to kind of elaborate on Anthracnose a little bit, as I always do. But you know, we were getting samples of Anthracnose early in the year, and we got to run just after the courses started to open and everybody started to come back into this you know, golf mentality rather than survival mentality. And again, you know, I'm not sure my colleagues are right. I remember Frank asking me, "What do you think of everybody's advice?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know, man. You know, because you know, I felt like I could foresee the transition being problematic." And you know, we all know what happens if you lower the height of cut too quickly. And so anyway, so that brings me to you know, what did we actually see? You know, and what kind of samples did we get, and what kind of diseases did we turn out to have? And you can see, of course, my trusty assistant, you know, Sabrina's worked for me for 22 years. And you know, I like to tell her that she's responsible for everything, and I'm just a figurehead. But she's a hard worker and really effective at what she does, and so she's getting samples ready for us to process. You know, this is a day's worth of mail, and we're ready to roll here. It's a you know, it was good. Now, you know, I don't remember why I put this in here in this particular location. But before I get talking about the samples, I guess now I remember it. You guys are going into the time of year where you do tree work. So I'm going to be a scold right now, and this is how you cut down trees. You know, with a bucket truck and with safety equipment and proper technique. My second biggest group of clients next to you are certified arborists. That, you know, ISA certified arborists, This time last week, I was talking to a group of Philly arborists, and one thing I want to tell you is tree work is in the top 5 most dangerous professions. And I saw on Twitter this morning one of my former students with a chainsaw and no protective equipment, no helmet, no eye protection, basically just lop off a 40-foot tree with terrible. When I show those videos, I show them the tree guys, and every time they go, that dude just trying to get killed. And so what I want to tell you is hire a professional to do this. I tell my students now that if your boss hands you a chainsaw and says go down, cut down a tree, just say no. And so that's my public service announcement. That you need a crane and you need the appropriate training to do this without hurting somebody. So anyway, I'll get back on track. So what do we see? Submissions by Diagnosticians in 2020. Temperature, moisture, stress, Pythium. You see the ones in red are always in the top 5. Again, largely because there's a root or a stress relationship to these problems, and they can have nondescript symptoms in the field. They're harder to diagnose, right? I highlighted a couple other things in blue because I wanted to mention them in the talk. And again, these lists, it's remarkable how similar they are from year to year. And again, I think the stuff that comes in most frequently are things that are harder to diagnose in the field, but everything else moves up and down the list because of the weather, right? And that's an important consideration when we're looking at what we might have. Now, the first thing on the list almost every year, except for 1 year when we had nematodes up there, is abiotic stress. And here's just another screenshot from my Twitter feed. It's in August, but Lee Butler is my colleague that runs a diagnostic laboratory at North Carolina State. Lee is a really smart turf guy and looks at a lot of warm season grass. And Lee says between 35 and 45% of his samples are no disease activity or abiotic stresses. And that's the same with us. We are anywhere between about 30 and 45% from year to year. And so, if you get the response that says no disease, and it's just hot out, you recognize that that's good information too, right? It'll keep you from spraying unnecessarily or even panicking. There's less you can do about the weather and its impact on your grass. But at least you have an answer for what's going on, right? At least you're not worrying about a Pythium or an Anthracnose. So we look at the weather, and this is from the state climatologist. And so what you're seeing here is that we had a pretty damn dry year, and this shocked me because I thought we were raining a lot, and so you see get into July and the monsoon hit, but until July we're below average for the the 100-year average, and so I didn't like this picture. So I went in and I started looking. I went in and I started looking at the monthly charts from Weather Underground. And what I recognize here in March, 18 out of 31 days had measurable rainfall, and in April, 16 out of 30 days had measurable rainfall. So even though we were below average in totals, it was raining like every other day. It was cloudy and overcast and misty all through this time period, right? And that's a disease driver too. I mean, we're not necessarily worrying about how much rain we got as much as we are the total time that foliage is wet. These leaf wetness periods play a strong role in disease outcomes. We also looked at temperature, and I like this graph too, man. Anybody that says climate change is not true is out of their minds. When you see this, and we have the 2nd warmest summer and the 7th warmest winter, and at the end of the season we're 2 or 3 weeks ahead in growing degree days. Look, man, every one of these guys is in the top 10. All of these boxes here. So nobody likes a wet and hot summer more than a pathologist, and so a lot of what we had were because of the wet and the hot. Right now, I also want to point out this little period of below average temperatures here, because I'm going to come and riff on that in a minute. So again, we're looking at, you know, basically dry and then a lot of rain, and then over you know, above average temperatures. And as far as I know, from conversations I had with Art Degatano, who's the head of the Northeast Climate Center, we're going to be above average temperatures until late winter, and it's going to be wet. So again, we're in this like kind of warm, disease-oriented pattern here. Of course, temperature and moisture stress kind of backing up into that. Lot of wear and tear. A lot of these plugs they were failing because of the weather, but also because of traffic. I also like to point out things, you know, infrastructure is huge, root zone is huge. Shade and air movement are huge factors in overall turf health. But I really think that infrastructure, more than anything else, root zone is a huge factor. The longer I do this, the more I realize that the crummiest samples come on the crummiest root zones. And so, you know, if you want to fix anything in your personal situation, that might be something to pay attention to. Note that the samples dropped, and this is a low number, a low percentage of abiotic stress type samples this year. It was below 30%, and so that's kind of unusual. I think a lot of the reduction in the number of samples we had were from this abiotic stress category. And before I move on, none of us saw this, but this is one of the coolest things ever. This is about a month ago up in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and they had 5 inches of snow and the low temperature between 18 and 20 in beginning of November. And this is what it did to the grass. And you see that sort of thing on warm season turf on Bermuda, but never seen it on cool season grass. And it really hammered on Kentucky bluegrass. And so, you know, just because it's cool, it made it into the talk here. You know, the weather was good for brown patch. We had a huge number of brown patch samples, more than normal, almost made the top 5. That's at my house, you know, threw a mask on for the seasonal, for the year, you know, so we remember through the ages what this was like. So good brown patch. You know, brown patch depends on warm nighttime temperatures and regular rainfall and high humidity, and we had that in spades. I got a lot of this from landscape turfs. One of the interesting things we saw was homeowners sending us more samples than usual because all of our county offices were closed. You know, so they couldn't get anybody on the phone but us. And so I had to deal with a lot of recreational turf managers this summer. And brown patch was a big deal. You can see here in tall fescue, I don't know how well you can see the disease, but it's raging in this turf stand. And so if you're using tall fescues, you know, particularly if you traffic tall fescues with brown patch on them, they'll tend to fail. It's Achilles heel for some of this, for this type of grass. So again, another cool thing that we saw this year was a disease called Thatch Collapse. You know, I've been reading about it. I never had a good sample that I could prove. And we finally got a sample in the lab, and we grew the fungus. It takes about 2 weeks of incubation to get this. And these are fruiting bodies. They're mushrooms. And the fungus is called Sphaerobolus stellatus. And these things erupt open and shoot, they're called glebal masses. They're spore masses. They'll shoot them like 20 yards towards something that's reflective. You know, and most of the time I've dealt with this is from homeowners associations where the glebal masses were shot all over the siding or all over the sides of cars from mulch piles. This thing degrades mulch, and it has pectolytic enzymes and stuff that degrades thatch. And when it gets into turf grass, it degrades thatch, and you wind up with patches like this. It's very, very easily controlled, like you might control a fairy ring. But again, those glebal masses are shooting all over the place, and this is something that we've recognized, you know, in golf turf over the last decade or so. I just never got a good sample, and so I needed to share that with you, just for the coolness factor. All right, something that we're doing now. Dollar Spot was quite active this year and moved up the list. Again, most of my samples of Dollar Spot come from residential clients, and so we did not see a ton from golf turf. I'm sure you had incidents of it. It's always the most troubling disease to control, and that's why we got samples from golf turf, and that's why I'm using this slide. We are looking at failures, fungicide control failures on some local golf courses, and we are evaluating a number of different fungicides for resistance and resistance management. And so in the protocols that we're doing now, the SDHI materials are of concern. Generally speaking, we were looking at DMIs, and we were having a conversation earlier today with the event organizers here about how guys kind of get hung up on certain materials and they overuse certain materials. I was working on a fungicide protocol. I was helping a person who was trying to put together a early order, and they put together a program, and they had like 8 out of 14 treatments was a DMI fungicide, and like I thought, well, that's not a very good idea, and gently rearranged it for them. But again, so we're seeing that, this resistance issue, and I also want to tell you, we looked at some samples of Microdopium earlier in the year, and we found that in those Microdopium samples, the snow mold, that there was a strobilurin insensitivity. So you are using Heritage, or you're using one of the strobies in the winter for snow mold control. There's pressure there too. So again, this idea, particularly with the newer fungicides with more specific modes of action, that the propensity to overuse stuff. And I think that's why we're looking at the SDHIs right now, because they're newer and guys get happy about it, and they work and they keep spraying it. And, James Hempfling at Rutgers sprayed Bosclet or Emerald 9 times and saw insensitivity. So you need to be careful about this. And I think it was heartening to see Dr. Clark coming in a seminar in a few weeks to talk about fungicide programs. I see a lot of spray sheets, man, and I'm always tempted to put them up here, but I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But I think that we need to spend some time thinking about how we use these materials with an eye toward resistance management. I think it's an important thing for all of us to maintain the efficacy of these products on individual sites. All right. Next, annual bluegrass weevil. So we saw a bunch of them, and I talked to Ben McGraw earlier. I talked to Ben and Kaminsky a lot this summer. They're working on cannabis, and I got working on the cannabis trials here at Rutgers, and so we were comparing notes about that. But Ben says it wasn't a good year for annual bluegrass weevils. And I laugh because for me, it was a good year for annual bluegrass weevils. We got more samples of this than normal. And so the samples come in, it looks like anthracnose or something, and we get plugs like this, and we pull them apart, and we usually can find a critter under all the yellow plants, a larvae or pupae or some kind of a callow adult. And a lot of times we don't see this in the samples. What we wind up finding are plants that have been chewed. And so the critters are gone. But this year we saw a lot of this. This was a picture. It's a cell phone picture I took in the lab one day. Just thinking to myself, wow, I'm getting these samples, and it's been a long time. I mean, this is an insect that gets so much press. Everybody knows what it looks like. The days when guys would come in and they'd be hanging out the side of the plug and they didn't know what was wrong are long gone. And you're hopefully you're laughing, but that happened to me one time. Guy's like, I don't know what's wrong with the grass, and I was like, well, maybe it's this that's hanging out the side of your plug. But anyway, so we see them. Know that they prefer annual bluegrass. In all the lab work and stuff, and given a choice, they're going to be on annual bluegrass. They like a moderate height of cut too, a little bit higher height of cut. Ben suggests that, once you get down to 100 and 110, you're collecting up a lot of them in the mower, not an insecticide control worthy collection, but you're getting 30% of them that way. So you're less likely to see damage because there's less space for them to hide, and there's less surface area of plants to lay their eggs in. That being said, they will get in bent grass, and we see them in bent grass in some of the samples. Now, why was it bad for us? And so I go to a survey that Ben and Albrecht did in 2017, and they got responses. And one of the questions was scouting methods employed by golf course superintendents. And so what you see here are the things, the highest percentage of people looking at these things are looking at weevil track and using plant phenological indicators. I like the mower basket thing a lot. One of the things that tells me is you got to maintain those clippings. So don't let them clippings get away when the critters are in there, because they're going to survive the mowing. But again, as you go down the list, what I recognize here is the scouting protocols that have the most precision, right? Things like salt flushes and vacuuming, are active scouting. You're out there doing something to catch them, right? Weevil track and plant phenology is a passive scout. Something or somebody else is telling you to make. My view of this is that you need to use both. Passively, weevil track or something will tell you that it's time to start doing some of the more active monitoring, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Weevil track, it's great, man. I follow it, and I want to know what Albrecht and Ben and Steve McDonald are seeing and all that stuff. But then I think to myself, man, the closest weevil track site's like 30 miles from my house. So what the hell does that have to do with my personal, microclimate, right? And so I think you need something more here. And so we also use phenological indicators. And I know everybody's heard this Forsythia, and then you got the red buds and the dogwoods, and the rhododendron, and so most folks will think, if you're passive about this, that you spray on the Forsythia half green, half gold. Great indicator, works really well most of the time. Most of the time is the key here. And so if you go back to when Forsythia bloom, it's in this April period. And so the Forsythia bloomed and it looked really good. And then the temperature got really cold, right? And it stayed. And what's interesting about it, it was dry and it was cool. It was one of the best springs for spring flowering plants I've ever seen. It was like an arboretum. The cherries were out for like quadruple the amount of time. The pears, everything, the apples was all blooming all at the same time. It was just, and the Forsythia just sat there. And the temperature wasn't moving. Now, if you look at grow in degree days, what you're going to recognize is that we weren't adding any grow in degree days during this time period, right? And so I kind of get to the next picture here and show rhododendron, right? The rhododendron bloomed on schedule, and so when the rhododendron blooms, right? So you're treating for adults on the Forsythia, you're treating for the larvae on the rhododendron, right? So again, if you look at the grow in degree days, that's 110 to 125 grow in degree days, and you're getting the Forsythia bloom in there. At 175 grow in degree days, after these critters have moved onto your playing surfaces, you're getting the dogwood. And then at 350 grow in degree days, you're getting the rhododendron, right? So what happened this year was, if you sprayed passively on the Forsythia, we didn't hit 125 grow in degree days for almost 5 weeks after that. And so you were ahead of the migration and you missed it, right? And so I saw people who missed it and wound up with damage, even though they treated because they were premature. So the point I'm trying to make here is grow in degree days are a much more precise measure of what's happening on your particular site, right? Weevil track and the phenological indicators are good, but you need to have something with more precision to get a better kill, right? Now, that being said, if you got out to 350 grow in degree days, that picture of the rhododendron, I took that at 342 growing degree days. Rhododendron was right on it. So if you missed them in the spring and you came back with match point or Ference or something at the rhododendron, you probably cleaned it up. But again, probably is the term here. Again, and I think that's why we saw so many, because the weather was funky in the spring. Clipping baskets work. Again, that's important. But I also like this sort of thing. If you go to the website at Cornell for Kyle Wickings, he's got some good video on how to use these things and how to do a systematic scouting protocol on your golf course. I highly recommend his website. I also recommend this salt flush. Again, this is a little bit ridiculous. It's research, but salt water, and you can float the larvae out to give you a little bit more precision in location and timing on your golf course. All right, so that brings me to another question. Name the #1 most common diagnosis that Rutgers lab makes every year. You can see I gave you a little hint. Little root zone problem there.
And I have launched that question, and people are coming in with answers. So we'll give it 1 minute.
That root zone looks like a Smith Island cake. You guys know Smith Island is way down in the Chesapeake Bay. It's one of the furthest south of the islands. My brother's wife is from there, and so they make a 9-layer. It's good cake, put it that way. All right. Hopefully you got the answer. What about anthracnose? Anthracnose samples went down. That's good because they've been going up. And so here's what I want to say about anthracnose. Colletops cereale, good saprophyte, gets on stressed grass. Here's the first sample I had. Andy at Bethpage sent in March 2020, and there it is in March, coming over the winter, and he has damage. And here's the plug he sent me. Anthracnose basal crown rot. There's an argument among some of us pathologists about whether that's a new infection in the year or overwintering infections from the season before. That's my point of view. I don't think it's warm enough to get that much disease in a plant that, in March when it's, cold. And so again, that's important. Here's another picture I had from April. You can see that this is a public course, man. This superintendent gets like 250 rounds on a sunny day in February. So it's up in New York, and the green's all pockmarked and beat up. Here's another one. I'll admit that I have some of this putting green in my turf grass outside my house. You can see, you got anthracnose already in March and April and May. And here's the last one. This was May. And you have these small spots. This stuff very quickly is going to turn to this. And then you're going to be fighting anthracnose all year. I mean, this is well supported, from anecdote from what we see, but it's also supported from research that James Hempling did, where you can see that what's going on here. There we go. I can't get my mouse to work anymore. And you can see that the earlier, if you look at the middle chart there, the earlier that you have disease, look at the bottom line there, the worse it is in the summer, right? So if you're coming out of the winter with yellow, small dime-sized spots and pockmarking and stuff from anthracnose, it's going to be worse during the year. So it's really, really important for you to maintain, going in through the fall, so that you don't come through the winter with a problem before you even get started, right? So again, the earlier it starts, the worse it's going to get. I'll beat this up. I have a student in my class whose boss was one of my students, and his boss told him, Buckley's just going to tell you to fertilize more. And I'm not going to tell you to fertilize more. I'm going to tell you to fertilize enough, right? You need to keep your nitrogen levels up around 3 pounds for an annual bluegrass putting green. We've known that for more than 10 years. It's the limiting factor for anthracnose. We'd like you to front load it in the beginning of the season. James Hempling, I was going to show you some of Dr. Murphy's spray sheets on the plots, but I thought that would make him mad. But we're front loading and, you know, into the system to beat this back. Now, the other thing that's important here is potassium. There's some good evidence for potassium use. And again, so before I move on to the potassium, you know, there's a lot of guys that don't like to use nitrogen. It's a new phenomenon because it was an old phenomenon in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And this is a paper that Stanley Zontek wrote. You know, and one of the things that he says here is that if you're mowing and collecting clippings off your green, you're using about 2 pounds of N. You're removing about 2 pounds of N for the season. So if you're only putting on a tenth, you know, if you're only putting on a pound and you're mowing off 2 pounds, little by little, you're going to use up your storage in the green, in the root zone. You know, all that nitrogen that's been mineralized naturally is going to little by little disappear. And when it does, you're going to fall off a cliff and you're going to have a big problem. And that's what we saw in the late 90s. And you know, this trend or fad has come back. You need to be careful about this. You know, it's pretty clear for anthracnose that you need more N. Now, as far as K is concerned, you know, getting the soil test and your MAP pH or your MAP potassium level of 50 parts per million is really important. And again, front loading that in spring and maintaining a soil testing protocol, I think, is important for this. It is below, or this is a number that is above the MSLN level that a lot of guys are using for their fertility. You know, so at the MSLN, you don't have enough potassium in your green. All that extra nitrogen you can manage with plant growth regulators. I love the guys at Nebraska and all the stuff they're doing about growth. Follow their lead. The last thing I want to say here is, because I'm starting to run out of time and I got lots of stuff to talk about, is, you know, for snow mold control. PCMB is a great choice. You know, I'm looking at it snowing right now thinking, man, I would have put out that FF2, you know, and PCMB is a great snow mold control. And I think it's something that we got away from, you know, and so if you need to rotate a different material in than you've been using in the last few years, you know, you might want to consider this product again because it's a kick-ass anthracnose control. And, you know, I hear people talking about like PCMB stunting roots and stuff. There really isn't any evidence in the literature for that. And it has been refuted in some of the more modern studies. So I wouldn't be afraid of using it, and it might give you a leg up on your anthracnose coming out of the winter. So there's my 2 cents for that. Summer patch, you know, we got our normal amount, and we throw our friends at touching under the bus. There's a little summer patch there. We got some summer patch from a high-end golf course, and breakthroughs are not uncommon. Well-executed fungicide programs, you know, you can get breakthroughs if the weather suggests that you're going to have a breakthrough. You know, so integrated approach is always best. And with fungicides, you know, we got good materials. It's all about timing. It's timing. Timing matters, particularly in the first application. So actively measuring root zone temperatures on your site is going to give you a better chance of preventing the breakthrough later in the season. The other issue here is using enough water. Make sure you use enough water to get it into the root zone, and without too much to blow it past the roots. You know, at least 2 gallons. You know, a lot of these newer materials are pretty water soluble, so you don't need to push them like you need to push thiophanate methyl or something in the old days. Nematodes, another just quick here. We got more nematode samples, but less of them are below the treatment thresholds. So that's the first anecdote that I have that the new materials are starting to actually work. You know, we see some courses that we've worked with for quite a while, you know, where the levels of nematodes are below the thresholds. What's important to note is if you're going to use Divinem or Indemnify or something, you follow the label, right? Some of the failures are based on, you know, the superintendent not following the directions on the label. The label is real important. Of course, you should all read them every time. You know, the sampling, we've been talking about sampling a little bit for a while. The samples have been coming in better. You know, we don't like looking at plugs. We'd rather see a random sample, and we're getting more of that than we used to. So I think that's a good sign as well. So question number 3. What diseases and insects were more common this season just because of the weather? You know, I hopefully that you can get that. I don't see the question popping up, but there we go. Yeah, wait.
I think that was a different. I did not include that of the 4. So.
Oh yeah, I put them in a different order. Sorry.
That's okay. So this is question 3, which we went over a little bit earlier, I believe, as well.
It's all good. You'll have the answer to that question already. All right, Pythium root rot. I'm gonna go to Pythium root rot because I got Pythium to talk about.
Let's give it 30 seconds so I can then close the quiz and get them back to you. Sorry, so 20 more seconds.
I'm watching the clock here, and I'm going, oh no, I don't have enough time.
No, you're good. You're good.
All right. What I'm going to do is talk about Pythium, right? And so again, look, here's where they came. It was late. Anthracnose and annual bluegrass weevils early, you know, regular diseases through the summer patch, brown patch, you know, and then here we got the rain coming. And so I'm going to kind of elaborate a little bit. We got more Pythium foliar blight than normal. And I don't see that much of it generally. And there's a lot of different Pythium species that cause Pythium foliar blight. And this is Pythium aphanerdomatum, which is historically the one that everyone looks at. But, you know, there's at least 10 that can cause foliar blight. You know, reproductive structures, a little bit of academic here. And you know, Pythiums are problematic because when they go, they go. This mass, you know, is in a plug that we incubated overnight. So the mycelium grew in a matter of hours, and you put it under a microscope. It's the same mycelia here. You note that it's already producing reproductive structures and zoospores and that kind of thing. So it's a quick moving thing. It's going to come on and you know, kill grass quickly, and everybody knows that, right? You know, it'll start suddenly, and the spots will continue to grow. The grass will be water soaked and dark. You get a greasy appearance. Even in the lab, we got greasy looking black grass, and I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. You know, if you see this kind of blackening, it's probably Pythium. We get all kinds of stuff, you know, from greenhouses, and Pythium blight or Pythium root rot is a big problem in geraniums and poinsettias and all that stuff. And always the crowns of those plants, you know, chrysanthemums are black, you know, when they come in. And so I think it's a really solid symptom to pay attention to, this dark discoloration. Of course, the fungus will fuzz up readily. It's not uncommon to see some fuzz out there. You know, if you're seeing fuzz in little small spots, probably dollar spot, right? You're seeing fuzz in a regular area, it's probably Pythium. See fuzz around the ring, you know, you're looking at a brown patch or something. But again, you know, it's a prolific mycelial producer. It likes tall fescue seedlings a lot. Be surprised how well it does in tall fescue seedlings. Here's some perennial ryegrass, you know, with the disease. You know, Dr. Clark uses seedling perennial ryegrass for his fungicide trials, and that's what this is. You know, this was a picture I got, you know, Twitter DM with some fuzz and some, you know, you can even note how dark it is comparatively. And so there's a little bit of flare up here. This is this summer. Note that it's going to move with the water, and you know, you guys are experienced and y'all know this sort of stuff. If there's puddles, the fungus will swim in the puddles. It's going to move with the mower. I always love this picture because this dude had put out a slow release material, and it was like 90 degrees, and then it rained 3 inches, and all this product released and ran into the drainage swaths, and he got this big flush of growth, and then Pythium broke out and killed all the grass. So, it's like adding insult to injury. But you can see where the water's moving here clearly, and where the damage is. Just
Rich,
some
real
dead
quick, we
grass.
had a Rich, real quick, we had a question from slides previous. Thatch collapse. Does thatch collapse affect one grass variety more than others?
The thatch collapse, no, there's not a host, because it's not a pathogen. It's more like a fairy ring. It causes the grass to decline because the thatch is disappearing. So the grass will the surface will be disrupted, right? And so it's not actually infecting the turf grass, right? So we see it in the first reports are from Europe, where they're using the fescues on the greens. And in fact, the sample that I had was actually overseeded with a fescue, and so red fescue, and so but that I think because there's more thatch in those grasses,
Okay.
it's an issue. But again, it's not a pathogen. So all right, let me jump back on. I'm just trying to rip this out and let 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we can do some questions. So this is a putting green I went to. This guy's way low end. They actually play polo on the golf course, and with horses and stuff. And so I stopped by because I was in the neighborhood, and all of his greens look like this after Sunday afternoon, like monsoon. And he comes in on Monday and he has massive damage everywhere. So we saw a lot of Pythium blight, right? Now here's the last kind of, everyone's seen this picture, and this is a picture that Pat Sanders took in 1983. And this is when we found out that Subdue was subject to resistance management problems. Subdue came on the market in 1978, and by 1983, it was a problem, right? And so there's 2 points here. What I was getting at with the SDI fungicides is they're pretty new and everybody likes them and they work pretty good for a lot of stuff. Don't do this to them, right? It's new, it works good, everybody uses it. Next thing you know, they start to fail. Don't wreck them. And then the other thing is, a lot of guys don't use Subdue in their Pythium programs anymore. And I think it's something that you should add to your program. It works pretty good in a lot of the trials, man. So go ahead and use it. And so when are you going to get it? Hot and humid weather, hot nighttime temperatures. Again, my old boss, Phil Haliski, used to call it the 150 rule. I jack it up a little to the 160 rule. But if the temperature and humidity is 160 for 2 days, you're looking at a possible outbreak, right? Soft grass, again, seedlings and that sort of stuff. When you're seeding, high seeding rates, cranking on some granular Subdue Max or something on a seed bed might be a good idea. Nitrogen doesn't matter, except don't overstimulate the grass and keep it dry. And I think that comes, Pythium is not a fungus. We call it a fungus, but it's actually in the group of organisms that comprise the brown algae, the Strammonopila. Humans are more closely related genetically to fungi than Pythium is to fungi. Right, so it's a algae. So anything to keep it dry is really important. The cat from Vineyard, he talked at the expo years ago. He gave me a copy of his talk, and he had these greens that had Pythium blight. And this is what they did: they mowed down some trees, and this is the same green with some air circulation, light penetration, dry foliage. It's a better fungicide than Subdue. A little exposure to the light. Fans, what I'm saying here. You need to move air and dry that stuff out, right? Fungicides, there's a lot of materials here that are effective. We all like Segway. We all like Subdue. Everybody's using the Banol. People are using phosphite products. Again, here's something I wanted to mention about watering. Jim Kearns did some trials with a new product called Union, which is oxystrobin and cyazofamid. And cyazofamid is a local penetrant. It's not systemic. It's not acropedal. And the question was, do you need to water it in or not? Because I see guys putting out like what they call soil sprays and foliar sprays. And I think to myself, it don't make that much difference in a tiny little plant, whether you use enough water to put it in the root zone or not, to the product that's supposed to stay on the foliage. You kind of follow what I said there? So cyazofamid for Pythium blight, you think you would want it on the foliage. But in Jim Kern's work, he said that it didn't matter. If they used high gallonage and put it all in the root zone, or low gallonage and put it on the foliage, they got equal control. And the materials mixed together were better than either one of them separately. You know, so again, this idea of watering stuff into the root zone is important, you know, but don't not water something in just because it's a contact materials. And, you know, somebody like Mike Agnew might correct me, but I think a product like chlorothalonil is formulated so that it doesn't wash off that easily. And you're not likely to wash it into the root zone, you know, spraying with the two gallon gallonage. So again, you know, thinking about your intentions and where you want the product and how to use them are all really important considerations. All right, this was the last question about resistance.
So we did that one. We could skip over that.
You had that one already. Yep. So notice that how I'm trying to signal the answers to you. So let me do Pythium root rot and wrap this up. All right, so Pythium root rot. You know, we see a lot of this. We got what 88 samples of it this year, and again, most of them came late. Gloria Abad found 36 species of Pythium in the roots of turfgrass on putting greens in North Carolina, and we don't speciate these things. They all have a different, you know, it's interesting. They have different ability to kill grass. Some of them are really good at killing it. Some of them will grow up on the foliage and called Pythium blights. Some of them are only moderately pathogenic, so they kind of grind away at the roots, and the external stresses kind of kill the grass. Some of these work in cold weather, some of them work in hot weather. You can't make a lot of generalizations about Pythium root rot because of the number of different organisms that causes it, right? So usually we get plugs and it's overall thinning and general thinning. You know, that's the grass is thinning, it's not responding to your inputs. And we get it in the lab and we look at the roots and see Pythium, right? And so you get the Pythium root rot letter, right? So again, overall general thinning, some pictures of lanes, you know, just crummy looking. It can be patchy or spotty, you know, it doesn't have to be generalized. You may see it in stress areas. You know, I could show you this and tell you it was anthracnose or nematodes or something like that. You know, even summer patch will look like this. So you know, a little bit of external stress on those plants that are carrying the load of that Pythium are problems. Root zones with a lot of water. I say that because this golf course is in Seattle, and you know, here's the pictures they sent. So there's some damage along the edge. Here's some damage. You know, I love this picture because the aerification holes are green. And, you know, I forget who said it, Dave Otis or somebody. If the aerification holes are green, make more holes, right? And so this is a good example of why you need to have some aeration and some oxygen exchange, and you need to dry this out because the fungus really likes these conditions. Supersaturated soils, and you know you're fired if it looks like this. Here's another one. Love this one because in the next picture, you know, you can see that there's more damage along the drain lines, you know, and that sort of thing. And so this is a significant amount of damage. And you know, you get these storms where locally you'll get a couple of inches, you know, you get an inch or two in a couple of hours, and it doesn't drain, and your root zone's holding moisture, and you create a condition that favors these fungi. And then next thing you know, you're looking at dead grass. Again, patchy look to it. So how can you tell? I mean, the only way you can tell, and this is the reason I get so many samples of this. You know, it's not because we're biased toward it. It's because you guys can't tell in the field. I mean, what the hell are you going to say about this? It looks crappy, right? So you bring it to the lab, and we start looking at roots or looking at plants that are kind of mealy and crummy with tiny little root zones. And we boil those plants in potassium hydroxide and stain them. And then if I see something like this, you get Pythium root rot, right? So what matters here the most? Your root zone, your moisture use, how much moisture is your plant, is your green holding, crappy soils, are crappy soils. And if they hold moisture, it's going to favor the fungus, right? And that's what we want to try to do in a cultural program. We want to change the conditions so it doesn't favor the pathogens, right? And so if you have standing water, remember being on a green and thinking, man, the drain is like upslope from here. No wonder it smells like a swamp while I'm walking here, and you see root zones that look like this black layer. I mean, look, man, you can put Coban on this green every Monday, and it's still not going to perform any better because the root zone's crappy too. You might turn off the fungus, but you can't recover the quality of your putting surface without fixing the damage in the roots. And seriously, sometimes it's subtle, man. Look at these layers. These layers are going to hold water. And so you again, talking to Dave Otis, you want a root zone like 2% organic matter, and so you want to be real careful about this sort of stuff. Soil testing doesn't matter that much here. Again, this idea of being dry, of creating a condition that doesn't favor the algae is the way you're gonna survive. Fans, are great. Cutting down trees are great. Just do it in a professional, safe manner. Airify. There's a trend toward not doing this sort of stuff, right? So again, you don't want to get caught up in fads, or you want to tailor your inputs to your specific site, right? Remember who your client is and what your conditions are, and do the best you can working with what you have. And again, a little bit less moisture holding capacity of your soil is probably a good thing when you have Pythium root rot. Generally, what we would recommend is Banol or Segway, and then you follow up with one of these other materials in a regular program throughout the season until you can grow it back. Recognize that the grass won't recover until you start to grow some new roots, right? So that's something important. Now, last couple of slides here. There's a disease that John Kaminsky's been talking about. We've looked at it for a while. I looked at it up in Connecticut. That's called Pythium patch, or POA patch, or whatever. Pythium patch. It's neat. They're studying it. It really, to me, they're just splitting hairs among all the different Pythium species. The Pythium species that they're talking about are relatively minor Pythium fungi that are causing problems when you use a lot of phosphite. If you're stuck on a phosphite program, you never get any Subdue or Banol in there. This is something that they've been seeing. The point I'm making here is that, yeah, this is something, but we don't know nothing about it yet. There's not enough research to be certain and give good recommendations on what to do or when it's going to happen and all that stuff. But it's in process. It takes some time, man. Remember, it took us 10 years to figure out Anthracnose. The last question here, as reflected in the photos of the lab and the photo credits during the talk, who clearly does all the work at Rutgers in Rutgers Plant Diagnostic Lab? It's definitely not those two characters on each side bookending my bookmarking my assistant there. I can't even tell you how fortunate I am to have an assistant that's as good and as aggressively effective as Sabrina is. Hopefully that all of you guys will find yourself an assistant on your course that's as effective for you as she is for me. And so with that, just to remind you, if you need me, this is where you can find our phone numbers and our emails. Go to the website, and seriously, if you're sending samples, don't be afraid to give a call. Send a photograph. It might make it into the talk next year. But remember, it's a collaborative venture, this diagnostic process. And the more we communicate, the better off I'll be able to help you. And so with that, I think I'm done.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Anybody want to type in the, you can just type it in the chat box. We have one, Rich. Is there one disease that you diagnosed that surprised you this year?
I think, my favorite one was the Thatch Collapse, because we could never prove it. But the disease that surprised me the most was the Pythium blight, you know, and because we almost never get it, and then suddenly I got a whole bunch, and I often wonder if guys sort of just forget about Pythium blight, you know, and in your preventive programs you're sticking to phosphites or something like that, which might be less effective for Pythium blight, you know, than some of the other products.
Rich, you and I in the production meeting with Mike Reed and Jason this morning, we discussed you changing that program for that individual who had a bunch of DMIs. Could you go into like how site specific and what thresholds and how clubs differ in expectations and what you might see or might be able to help somebody with?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Like I said, I look at a lot of spray sheets, and I see a lot of what I would consider to be bad decisions. Now, that being said, I'm not calling anybody stupid here, but and I understand the pressure that you're under. And you know, Dr. Clark told me a long time ago that just say if it makes you sleep better at night, go ahead and do it. But that being said, you know, the first thing when you're coming up with a program, I think that's most important is recognize who your clients are. You know, are you at a championship level, high-end course with good infrastructure, you know, or are you at a municipality that's getting 200 rounds on a February Saturday, you know? So where are you? What quality product do you have to have? And I'm not saying that the low end is a poor quality product, but you need to cater to your clientele. And so that first decision allows you to adjust your cultural practices accordingly, right? You know, a friend of mine on a low end course, you know, they're mowing at 155. You know, they're mowing one day and rolling the next day and roll, you know, and you know, it's a public. I keep using the word low end. I don't mean that. You know, it's a public course. And so mowing at 155, you know, means that they have less pressure from anthracnose and summer patch, you know, and so they can use less materials or have longer intervals, right? Something like that, you know, and so, you know, so once you kind of understand your client and then adjust your cultural practices accordingly, right? Because on those public courses, man, if people are four-putting and taking 6 hours to get through a round, you know, it's a problem. So you got to back off, you know, and let them play their game in their way. And so that will inform what your fungicide program is. Now, the other thing that comes out of that is, you know, you'll get a clear picture of what your key pest problems are, right? So if you're in an annual bluegrass and you have you know, you're going to have anthracnose, you're going to have dollar spot. So you adjust your choices based on your main problems. So you start to manage for your main problems, you know, manage within the parameters of your clients, and then what you'll find is that you can use a lot less material, have a lot more you know, you can have longer intervals and still get a higher quality, a high quality putting surface, you know, still get really good disease control versus the I got to spray every Monday and I got to use 3 things kind of approach, right?
Gotcha.
Is that a long-winded version?
No, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Just some finishing up. Rich, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on board and doing the first one of our webinar series this year. in the first year ever. So COVID-19 2020 has definitely changed the way that we've approached education, and I know you are front and center with the classes, but it's kind of new to some of the guys in the field on how to get these credits and all that stuff. So remember, in order to receive your CEUs, you must take a picture of yourself holding your driver's license and email it to the email address here on the screen with the subject line of 12/9/2020 class. And I can't thank the sponsors enough who put up the monies to make this basically not cost anything. So with that, Jason, do you have anything you'd like to add before we sign off?
I think it went well, and I'm glad we had a lot of people here attending.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. And this will conclude our first webinar series and session. And I hope everybody has a great day and the rest of happy holidays. Thank you.